Ready? Okay, we'll be starting today, cover two Sa'ifim, Tezvav Tezayin, which deal, a shorter share, which deal with the concept of Mechila. Sometimes a Matzrin is moichel on his rights by certain actions or certain things that he does, or certain things he does not do, and therefore he is moichel his right to Matzronis, and afterwards he cannot come afterwards and claim that he wants to be a Matzrin. And although some of the cases which are discussed in these two Sa'ifim are limited, the concept of Mechila is a concept which comes across in various aspects of Bar Metzrah. Certain actions or certain words can be understood to be a waiver of your rights to what you thought you were entitled to, or you were actually entitled to. So in Sa'if Tezvav has some two cases, and Sa'if Tezayin has also two cases. Start with Sa'if Tezvav. Somebody buys a property next to a Matzran, next to a person A, Reuven, bought a property. And Shimon is the Matzran, and Shimon wanted to get rid of him, but didn't do it yet. What does want mean? We're going to get to soon. In the meantime, Reuven went, and for whatever reason, he sold his property that he owned. Obviously, he loses his right to claim Matzranos, right? Now, why is that? Simply, the Gra writes what's common sense. You're no longer a Matzran at this stage. Your whole right is mitzad Matzranos. So Asisa Yoshev Atev is that somebody should be able to have two fields together. It's not an inherent right that you have a right to the property. You have a right to have two joint properties. So if you sold your original property, then by you buying the second property, there's no Hayoshev Ha'atev, there's no merging of two properties. So therefore, there is no din of Matzranos, and you lost out your din of Matzranos. But now, on the flip side, what happens if now the person who bought the field from Reuven comes and says, I have replaced Reuven as the Matzrin, and whatever I got, I bought all the schusim that Reuven had, and therefore I should be able to throw out Shimon. He also can't. Why is that? The Smer writes, in very simple also, it all goes on a timeline. Reuven, who bought the property, was zoiche in his karka before Shimon's client bought the property from Shimon. Yeah, so which means, very interesting point from the Smer, and something which we were discussing in previous shiurim, that there is a discussion. The lekeach is essentially, according to the Smer, from here it looks like the lekeach who buys a property on Matzranos is be'etzim an owner until proven otherwise. It's not that he is, we discussed there's a machlekes if he's a holder or if he's a owner. Over here we see, according to the Smer, it seems like he's the owner until proven otherwise. The Pischei Tshuva over here brings from Divrei Mishpat. And the Pischei Tshuva adds over here something. Just like Shimon's client who bought the original Matzranos field cannot throw out the lekeach, the first lekeach, so too Shimon can't come and throw out, Reuven, who is the lekeach, the first lekeach, can't come and throw out the new client and say, hey, I am a Matzran here, and therefore I should have, you bought it from the Matzran, but now, at that point, I became the first purchaser in this property, and now I became the Bar Metzrah. I want to throw you out of your field. Why? The Divrei Mishpat says, because it happens at the same time. The moment that the second person, that Levi will call him, bought the original Matzranos field from Shimon, at that same point, at that moment, Reuven, who is the purchaser number one, wasn't yet a Matzra, so he can't claim Matzranos. Because until that moment, Reuven, the original Matzron, could have thrown out Reuven, B'tainas Matzronos. And he didn't lose his right until the moment of sale. And at the moment of sale, at that point, the first one was not yet a echte Matzron. It all became at the same moment. Since it all became at the same moment, nobody could claim on the other one Matzronos. Which is a very interesting din to understand, even though from some angle it makes sense. From the other angle, it doesn't make sense. And that's what the Choshen ve'ephod over here has a problem with it. He's got stuck with this din. Sifkot Zayin Choshen ve'ephod. And he starts and he explains, he says, let's first understand what the Mechaber is trying to say. It's obvious that what the Mechaber is trying to tell us here, that even if the Matzrin's buyer, client, came and says, and when he purchased it, he had in his deed that I'm purchasing any rights that the original Matzrin has. I'm purchasing the field with all its attached rights. It's not enough to be able to then go and flip it on the first purchaser and say, you have to go out because I purchased the rights of Matzronos. And then he continues and he answers. He doesn't ask the question on the Divrei Mishpat, but his answer implies what the question is. And the question that's supposed to be in every person's mind is, when you read this Divrei Mishpat, is, if the Matzrin was thinking of selling his field, then at that moment, it's a raya that he was not planning on invoking his V'schus Matzronos. Which means that essentially, he was, maybe there was no mechila because he didn't say anything, but at the same time, it means that he never appointed the first lekeach as a shliach. If he never appointed the first lekeach as a shliach, so the first lekeach was already zeich in the field at the moment that he purchased it, because the original Matzrin never appointed him as a shliach. And therefore, why doesn't he have the right as now being the new Matzrin to throw out the new client? And he explains that we must say that the Divrei Mishpat is talking about a very limited case, that the Matzrin did want to throw out the first lekeach. And maybe took him to Bezdin, maybe gave him notice. We don't know exactly what he did. However, so at that moment, he became his shliach to purchase it. So the first lekeach is the shliach of the Matzrin. And then afterwards, the Matzrin changed his mind. And for whatever reason, maybe he got a bill from the bank, maybe he's going through a divorce, whatever it is, he had to get rid of his property for whatever reason it is. At that moment is when because he originally wanted to do it, so at that he didn't lose his right until the moment of sale. And therefore, the first lekeach didn't become the Matzrin until the first Matzrin walked off the deal. So the first Matzrin, the original Matzrin, gave up his right at the moment of sale. At the moment of sale of the Matzrin to his buyer, is at that moment three things happened. The land of the Matzrin got transferred from the Matzrin to the new buyer. The land of the first buyer became his because there's no more claim to it. So therefore, at that point, neither of them became Matzronim to each other. Neither of them could claim Matzronis on each other. But if the original Matzrin didn't say anything to the lekeach, and I add over here, and lachas kama v'kama, if the Matzrin did an action to show that he's planning on selling it, posted it in the market for sale, v'kayotze b'zeh, and even more so if he already has a signed contract to sell the property, so the first lekeach bought it kedin, and therefore he earned his title as a new Matzrin, and therefore when the old Matzrin is going to sell his property, the new Matzrin, who is the lekeach number one, could go ahead and take it out of that one. And the Choshen ve'ephod says, and this is clearly understood from the way the lashon of the Mechaber in this seif. The Shoshanas Yaakov over here goes into a whole discussion about understanding the whole seif from beginning to end. He takes it apart. And he starts by saying, let's first understand. He says first that the Rambam is the mocker of this din. Let's first understand what the Rambam says. This din is that the Matzrin, by him selling his property, he loses the right to claim it. And he asks the same question that we had before from the Choshen Ve'efet. Why did he lose it? The lekeach becomes his shliach at the first moment of purchase. The first lekeach becomes the first matzrin's shliach at the moment he purchased the field. So the matzrin essentially was zoiche already in the karka that's next to him at the moment of sale, at the moment of the original sale. So how could he then go and lose his rights? He was zoiche, he just didn't pay for it. He was zoiche in the karka and he owes money. He just didn't pay for it. And he says, Lu Yitzur, that you're going to be a situation that the matzin is going to come and take throw out the lekeach. And he didn't tell anything to the lekeach that he's planning on selling it. He had a plan. He's going to throw out the lekeach. Now he has two joint properties. He goes then, he takes his property and the property that he just took away from the lekeach and flips it for a big profit the next day, 2 days later, 3 days later, whatever it is. Is there any svara in the world that the lekeach is going to come and say retroactively, I want to cancel it because you weren't planning on buying it and your actions show that you're not doing it? Obviously not. So therefore, even if he didn't throw him out, what's the svara? Why he lost his chus? So he says the only way to understand it is based on the tshuva of
If he sold it, means he's not planning to stay anymore.
No, he didn't sell it yet. What the Shaila Shanas Yaakov is, when a person has a schus, because be'etzim the karka is already the matzrin's,
But he sold it, now it's not your car.
he didn't sell it yet. He says, why does he lose his right when he sells it? He says, it's his property. He owns two properties now, he just didn't pay for one. So when he comes now afterwards, yes, he sold one, so he's going to sell the other one also. He has a right to sell both properties. They're both his. Elamai, he didn't pay for it. Why did he lose his right?
Funny question.
The question is deeper. The question is, what is the rights of a matzon to the field?
That's because you want to have some of the.
So that's the answer. That's his answer. His answer is that the Beis Yosef had this issue, and that's what the Beis Yosef brings from the Rashba, a tshuva of the Rashba. The din vayida sisa yeshu atev is only when you connect the two together. It's a special takan chacham to connect the two fields together. When you're not roy to connect the two fields together, then you lose your right. And the Shoshanas Yaakov says must be. That's what the Rambam holds, because otherwise it has to be that the svara of sisa yeshu atev doesn't mean that you acquire, that you have an inherent right, that you have, because let's put it this way, let's rephrase it. If somebody has a right of first refusal, which is what it's called in American law, I have a right of first refusal to buy this property. And I have an inherent right, because I signed a contract, to have a right of first refusal to this property.
What's first refusal?
First refusal means that I'm the first person, you can't, nobody else can buy it. Any offer that comes in, if I match it, I get it. Usually it's not an unlimited time. Usually you do it for 90 days, for 60 days, whatever it is.
Laws for neighboring?
There's no law such a thing. There doesn't exist such a law. If there is a contract signed of right of first refusal, then you can invoke it. Otherwise, bar mitzvah is against public policy in New York. It's a din that even if the bezdin would paskin, a person could go to court afterwards and overturn it. Because a pi'alocha, you let it go to court? No. Yeah, that's the paskin al pitayra. How can you know against Torah? What's the name? You want to say that they bought it? So you find the ways around it, huh?
Instead of bonus, don't you go like the
Not when it's against Torah. What do you mean? Yerush is also the name and we still don't paskin. When it's in Torah, you have to paskin according to Allah. You can't paskin according to the Mechuzah. If there's no tzavor, the bas is not Yerush. So if there is a right of first refusal, then even if I don't own anything, I have a right of first refusal on this property and I don't own the building to the right and I own the building to the left. Or maybe I did own the building on the right and I went and I sold it. I still have a right of first refusal over here. So if bar matzronos is an inherent right that I acquire that I always have, I could sell the right, I could invoke the right, I don't lose the right. And that's a question of Hashanah Yaakov. So he says there's no such an inherent right. So according to the Smei, you don't have a question b'chlal. Because the mashmos of the Smei is that the lekeach is the owner until proven otherwise. This question is only according to those that say that the lekeach is a shliach until proven otherwise. He's a shliach of the matzah until proven otherwise. Then you have a question. So machlokes, when is he a muchzak? We saw in the previous sifim that sometimes the lekeach is a muchzak. It's big machlokes when the lekeach is a shvus Yaakov, which is machriya, that most of the times the lekeach is a muchzak, except for very specific scenarios. I'm not going to get into it now, but machlokes, how do you define a muchzak? So he says, no, there is no inherent right. He says that Bes Yosef brings the Rashba is clear, there's no inherent right. And then the Shana Yaakov continues and he says that obviously if the Matzron did not come before and say that he wants to throw the Lekeach, then Lekeach, the first Lekeach is Zoicha right away in the Karka, and then he could remove the new Lekeach who bought from the Matzron Betainas Matzronas. The only question is, what happens if he doesn't say anything? If he was quiet? Do we say that Sika is like Mechila or not? Now we're going to see in the next sif. When there's a machlekes if not saying anything is considered a Mechila or not. Because Dinei Mechila, sometimes you have to do with the Eidim, sometimes you have to do with the Shtar, sometimes you have to do with the Kinyan, sometimes it depends on what kind of Mechila. And depends on what your rights are that you're being Meichel. It all circles back to the same question. Am I Meichel a right that I could have had? Am I Meichel something that I already own? Like what's exactly the Mechila is? Elamai, Elamai, that could you say that Shika works like Mechila is La'achar Maisa. If the Matzron didn't say anything to the Lekeach, and then he went and he sold it to the next person, his action shows that his being quiet was a waiver of his rights. Because if he would have in mind, he would say something. So the Maisa proves that the Shika was a Mechila, retroactively. But if he tells him that he wants to throw him out, and he changes his mind afterwards, and then he doesn't throw him out, then it's clear that there was no Mechila. And if you look in the Matar Shimon, it's mashma, that's how he understands that he also paskins like this. That this din is limited to only if the Matzrin said something beforehand. Let's move to Sifta Zayin because it's also connected also to the Mechila. Mashenk and Sifta Zayin is already if the guy dies, if the Matzrin dies. Is a din Matzron is Beirusha, we're not going to get into it now, just continue with Mechila. What's Sifta Zayin? We have Matzrin. We have a buyer, we have a seller, we have a bunch of the same crew. So you have Reuven goes and tells Shimon, go ahead and buy me the property that's on sale over there, 1 block over, 2 blocks over. He's been man him as a shliach to buy it. Shimon happens to be the matzrin to that field, to that property, 2 blocks over. First of all, Shimon cannot buy it for himself. Why, we're going to soon see. And after Shimon buys it for Reuven as a shliach, Shimon can't go now to the matzrin, to the lekeach, and say, hey, I'm the matzrin, I want to throw you out. That's the first din of the Mechaber says. Second din the Mechaber says, if Reuven is the owner of that field 2 blocks over, and Shimon is the matzrin, and Reuven goes over to Shimon and tells him, I'm imana you as my shliach to sell that field. And Reuven goes, and Shimon goes, and sells Reuven's field to somebody else, as the shliach of Reuven. then he's going to come and say to the lekeach, ich bin amatzen, I want to throw you out. It also doesn't work. Why? So obviously it circles around the din of mechila, but how does mechila work over here exactly? So the Smeh starts and says that the reason is, he says, I already explained in the Prisha, that even though the shliach is be'etzem the matzrin and apidin, he would have been able to throw out the lekech. The reason he can't buy it for himself is because of chashada. Yeah, when a shliach buys something for himself, it's because of chashad. There's the issue of chashad. Not because of yodoi kayodi, but because of the shliach. But rather, there's a chashad that's going to do some monkey business over here. And therefore, if it's only mitzat chashad, al pisvare, he explains in the Smeh, explains in the Prisha, that afterwards, if it's only mitzat chashad, afterwards he could go, the chashad is off already once the lekeach purchase it. Go afterwards to the lekeach and throw him out. And the fact that he helped him do it is not enough of a reason to throw him out, to consider mechila, kamash malan, that he can't anymore. And what is this chashad? The Smeh also explains it in Sif Chavav, and he says that he brings it in Sif Chavav, and in Sif Chavav he also mentions another reason, and he says not only is there chashad, that he can't, even if there's no chashad, you still can't buy it for yourself. Why? Because here he does say there's a reason of yadoi kayad balabayis, and therefore he can't be a shliach to sell and a purchaser at the same time. He can't sell from himself to himself. So since in the second case, where it's yodoi, kayad balabayis, he can't be a seller and a buyer at the same moment. And why can't you throw him out afterwards? The marshal, yeah. So the Smeh explains, that the fact that you agreed to go as a shliach, when you knew that you have a right to buy it, you should have told the moicher, the Reuven, I'm not willing to go and sell the property for you. I'm not willing to go and buy the property for you. You agreed to be a shliach. By you agreeing to be a shliach, it shows a mechila on your schus as a matzrin.
Why say this far, like, it would be nechalate to argue with the second person?
So there is somebody who brings that up, that there is, that he could say that, but I don't remember the answer to it, but there is somebody who discusses it, and I'll have to look at it afterwards. What's the difference between the reason of chashada and the reason of yoda kiyad balabais? The Taz.
What's the chashad?
Huh? When a person, when a person buys something, when a person is a shliach to buy something, and then he goes and he buys it for himself, they're going to say chashad that he played around with the deal, that he messed over the guy, stuff like that. They're going to talk about him. What's the nafkima between the two reasons? If the shliach went and bought it for himself, / the matzrin, did he get it or not? If it's mitzad chashad, l'chayre, he does get it. If it's mitzad yodei kiyad balabais, and you can't be a moicher and a koine together, then it doesn't work. And that's what the Taz comes to it and says, that's where the Taz struggles with this svara of the Smeh. And he says, obviously, if the reason is not chashad only, so obviously you don't throw him out. You can't throw out you can't cancel the shliach's purchase as a matzrin. And he says, and the other problem he said he has a problem with the Smeh, that by the mere fact that he went as a shliach, it shows a mechila. Taz says, I don't understand why by me agreeing to be a shliach to sell it, it's automatic, or to buy it, it's automatically a mechila. If the shliach cannot buy it for himself, so how could he have a mechila? Mechila is on something that I could have done and I didn't do.
No, but you said that it was the shas. Should have told him. You said the shas amina. That would be.
Yeah, so he says, how does that work? You can't be moichel on something that you cannot do. The Taz doesn't agree with the minay.
The shas amina, in other words,
He says if he has no right, if you say the reason is he has no right to buy it, if he has no right to buy it, then he didn't waive anything by becoming a shliach. He anyways has no right to buy it. He agreed to be a shliach, and he has no right to buy it, so he wasn't meichel anything. The Taz says must be that that is only in the case when the meshaleach tells the shliach, you have a right to do whatever you want. And the shliach went and bought it for the meshaleach, or the shliach went and sold it for the meshaleach. If that's the case, that he went and he sold it for the meshaleach, or he bought it for the meshaleach, in such a case, if he did not buy it for himself, because of chashada, or whatever the reason is, then it's a mechila. Because there's no chashad that's going to play around over here, because he gave him the reshus to do it. The Shoshanas Yaakov says he also discusses this Taz and the Smeh, and he questions the Svar of the Taz, questions the Svar of the Smeh. He says it makes more sense to say it's only mitzad chashada, and therefore, if, like the Taz says, if he gave reshus to the matzrin to buy it, to the matzrin / shliach to buy it for himself, and he didn't, that's considered a mechila. But if he didn't give him such a reshus, there's no proven mechila. And he says, but at the same time, he says the tam of chashad is the main tam, but you still need the other reason, the reason of yodei kiyad ba'al bayis. And he says, but the other reason is not strong enough. The main reason is not chashada. Because if the other reason is the main reason that yodei kiyad ba'al bayis, so what's bechal the havamina that he can buy it? He's a shliach to buy, or a shliach to sell. He can't do two things at the same time. He can't do two nekudas at the same time. Now, what is the svara? Why, if you sell to others, if you sell on behalf of the meshaleach to somebody else, you can't throw them out afterwards? So the Smith says here, like we said before, that he agreed to be a shliach, and there's no bigger mechila than that. And the Smith points out, even though the Torah brings that there are days goinim that are cholik on the Rambam is a mocker of this din, still in all, the halacha is like the Rambam, that if I became a shliach to sell Reuven's property and I went ahead and sold it, the moment I agreed to become a shliach, that's a sword of the Smeh, then I was meichel. The Bach says it's not because I agreed to be a shliach. He doesn't say those words, but he says it's because you did an action of selling it. And if you look in the Biur HaGra, also says that it's mitzad an action, and dibur be'alma is not enough. The big nafkaminas come out from the machlokes, that we'll call it machlokes, between the Smeh and the Bach. One nafkamina is in Choshen ve'efod, where he says, what happens if the shliach was memana a second shliach to sell it? So Reuven appointed the matzrin to sell his property. The matzrin goes ahead and says, not a real estate agent, gives it over to Levi. So according to the Smeh, he agreed to be a shliach, he was meichel. According to the Bach, he didn't do any action. You didn't sell anything. So you didn't waive your rights. That's a Choshen ve'efod says this case would be an nafkamina between the two. It's one example of an nafkamina between the two. Second, nafkamina, this is an Oitzer Mishpat brings it. If you became a shliach to sell it and you didn't sell it yet, it's on the market. And then for whatever reason, you didn't buy it. Maybe you didn't have money at the moment, but it's on the market for 3 months. And you didn't sell it yet. But you agreed to be a shliach. 2 months into the thing, the property is still for sale. You made a nice chunk of money. You want to go and you want to buy it. Did you lose your right as a matzrin or not? Or did you waive, were you meichel your right as a matzrin or not? According to the Smeh, that the mechila occurs at the moment you agree to be the seller on behalf of the moicher, you lost your rights. If it's according to the Bach that the mechila happens the moment you actually did the sale, then you didn't lose. Then you didn't lose the rights.
Why can't the guy buy another field?
Huh?
According to the Bach, only the Shas Ma'aseh the Mechila. So why can't the Shliach go and buy it?
It's at Chashode, it's at Yoda Kiyat.
So then in this case also.
Shaila is what happened with the Eved.
No, you're saying 2 months passed. Who cares 2 months passed? It's still Shliach.
It's Chashode, but what happens with the Eved? Did he buy it or did he not buy it? Is there a Mechila here that afterwards? The question is what happens to Maisa? If he bid the Eved, he bought it or not? Did we say that he was Moichelet? Could he throw him out afterwards or not? The Chatchil he shouldn't do, but could he throw him out afterwards or not?
Posting a sign or writing considered a Maisa?
As what? Posting a sign to your Bar Metzra?
Selling it. No, that you're going to sell it. You're selling it for this guy.
As a broker?
Yeah.
So the Pesach Choshen goes into it. We can get to it in a minute. Now, let's just put that aside for a second. We'll get to the broker soon. What happens if the din of the broker, the chayra, we're going to deal with the chayra, the broker is also, is it the dibur, is it the maisa? What does the broker do? He's not the actual seller. He just connects the two as a shatchan. So according to the Gra, the chayra wouldn't be a problem. According to the Chashulchan, it would be.
Once the question is the maisa means he has to do a maisa that shows he's meichel, or he has to do a maisa of selling?
A maisa of selling.
Oh.
According to the Bach, that's the maisa. According to the Gra also, he says that only Ezel ve'azbin, if I'm going to go and buy, it's not enough of a... I'm going to go and sell, it's not enough. It has to be that he actually went and sold it. Now, let's putting out a question in the air, and then we'll get to it soon at the end. What happens if the person did not know that he has the right to be a matzah and is namaretz? He discovered later, is that considered a mechila or not? Is that mechila betos or not? So I'm going to see that this... Then we're going to go. Let's continue to the mechaber, to the Ramah, and we'll see what if there's such a thing as mechila betos and such a thing if you didn't know what you're doing. The Ramah continues the last din over here. If the matzrin was a aid on the purchase, was a witness signed as on the shtar mechira from Reuven to the new lekeach, he can no longer afterwards come and say that he wants to throw out the lekeach. And the Smeh says it's because of mechila. And the lashon of the Smeh is the hare yoda u'mochal. He knew, and that's why he was meichel. Which just from this you could be medayik if he didn't know. There's no mechila. Mechila b'taz doesn't work. Yeah, just put this aside for a second. The Smeh compares it to a case in the beginning of Siman Kuf Mem Zayin, and when it comes to Cheskas Karkois, a person comes and says, you claim that you bought the field. This field was stolen from me. Yeah, he has a taina. I want my field back. The guy comes and says, the letzos du bist. Here's a shtar mechira, you signed on it. You're one of the Eidim that signed on the shtar mechira. So the Mechaber says, that doesn't work in Kuf Mem Zayin. And that's what the Smeh says. This is similar to that case. You signed on the document proving that the sale was valid. You should have said something over there. It happens to be that over there adds that if he's Eid Echad, the Chsim is nothing over there in Kuf Mem Zayin. Why? Because he knows that Eid Echad is nothing. So he signs for fun. The guy asked him to sign, he signs, but he knows it's nothing. Only if he signs as one of the two Eidim, that he knows that his signature affected something, then he can't change his mind and claim afterwards Gzula. Same thing if he signed the covered Ba'alma. That's still over there. Yeah, and the Grav here also explains the same thing, that the reason is because over here, by signing, he did a Maisa, and not Stam a Dibur Ba'alma. And that's why it shows that he was Meichel. Yeah, but that's the shit of the Grav. Now let's take aside. What? What?
Why can't he say that only 1/8? So it's nothing.
In what? No, if he's 1 out of 2.
But this case talking about 1 out of 2.
In Kuf Mem Zayin, it's 1 out of 2. That's what the Smeh brings. Smeh compares it to that case.
In our case, we say Ein Yochel Tzalak Alekech, right?
Yeah. If it was one of the Eidim on the shtar. Yeah. The Chayra, because otherwise the Smeh wouldn't compare to this. Look over there. The Choshen ve'efoid, if you look at it in Medayik and the Choshen ve'efoid, it seems like he holds that even without an actual Maisa of sale, but doing the involvement in it is already enough to make a mechila, not like the Gra. Or the Chashulchan, it's also mashma like that, and Sefkat Mechavalv, and the Chashulchan usually follows the Gra. But the Aruch HaShulchan goes further and he says, and you could be medayek from the Aruch HaShulchan both ways, because Aruch HaShulchan in Sifkot and Yudcheh says that if he was said a mechila in front of Eidim, to Eidim, then even though he says that it works, but it's only an Amira, there's no Maisa. But still, he says that it works, and l'chayre it would work even according to the Gra. But what's enough kamina if Amira or Maisa? What do you need to show mechila if you're a broker, taka? And then the question is, what's the din of the Amira of a broker? When the Gra and those that hold that Amira is not enough, is that any Amira, or it's only an Amira which doesn't bring along a Maisa? Because Maisa we know for sure is a Mechila. Amira, we can zich dingen if it's a Mechila or not. A broker is an Amira which brings about a Maisa. He's an active participant in bringing along the Maisa. So you could say it's an Amira, but it's an Amira that brings along the Maisa. It's very hard to say, even according to the Gra, that you're not going to be able, that this Amira broker could come and say, I was a broker, but I want to take it back. So by a broker, it would work that would be a mechila. What's the reason why Amira is not, according to the Gra, those that hold like the Gra, Amira is not enough? Very simple. By every Amira, if there's no Maisa behind it, or a mechila, you could say Meshat Ani B'cho. But if I'm a broker, I can't say Meshat Ani B'cho. The broker, by definition, is not a Meshat Ani B'cho. Yeah, and now let's go to the person made a mistake. If a person claims that he signed by mistake, he didn't know. So if you look over here in the Choshen Ve'ephod, sends you to the Mishpat Shalom, the Marasham. The Mishpat Shalom says from the Shuvas Marashak, this Zodim Lakan Lakan, Marashak with a kuf. There's no such thing as Shuvas Marashak. And the Choshen Ve'ephod copies the kuf into there, but both of them copies from the Be'er Heitev and Siman Kuf Mem Zayin. The Mishpat Shalom copies from the Be'er Heitev and Siman Kuf Mem Zayin, who copies from the Knesset Agdoila. And so obviously it's not the Marashak, because Shlomo Krilger was 200 years after the Knesset Agdoila, and over there it's in Knesset Agdoila, it's Marashach. That's the tshuva. So Shas tshuva is Marashach. Chelik Aleph Siman Kuf Chavav. He says Yishdadim Lakan Lakan. The Knesset Agdoila brings it. Lahalocha and Kuf Mem Zayin. It's Yishdadim Lakan Lakan. In Kuf Mem Zayin regarding a me'arer on the shtar. If a person claims that he signed it and it's a glaim l'davar, they didn't know what he was doing. They're vitos. What does it mean? It's Yishdadim Lakan Lakan. Yishdadim Lakan Lakan means you go back after the muchzak, which means probably the lekeach is going to end up with the field. Unless you're going to say that the Knesset Agdoila himself is one of the ones that holds that he's more extreme, that the lekeach is be'etzim shliach to the matzrin. And over here, he's be'etzim shliach to the matzrin from the beginning until proven otherwise. Huh? So then could that is the shit of Knesset Agdoila. That's what I remember, Knesset Agdoila. So therefore, it would be, according to Knesset Agdoila, could be that Tzaddim Lakan Lakan, you follow the muchzak, could be that the muchzak is going to be the matzrin and not the lekeach or the other person over here. Yeah. So, based on that, l'chayr, if somebody claims that, if the matzrin says, I didn't know I had a right to matzronis, but I didn't learn these halachas in Shulchan Aruch. I was kicked out of yeshiva before we got to this Perek. And in the Rambam, I fell asleep when this shir was happening. So I don't know about matzronis. And Taluch and Shavuos, he thought that Matzronis is only in Shemayim when it comes to Torah. Didn't know it has to do with his house also. And that's why he became a broker. Or that's why he was the one who was a shliach to sell. Or he was a shliach to buy. Or he was an aid. All of the above. And you have a raglaim l'davar. So you could argue that the mechila was betos. And again, you're going to end up with a suffix. You could say that he did not lose his schus, because if it's only based on mechila, if it's solely based on mechila, and the mechila is clearly proven to be by mistake, and you could medayik, like I said from the Smed, it says yoda, the lashon of Smed is yaharei yoda machal. He knew, and that's why he was meichel. Here, he clearly did not know, So then there's no mechila. Because Agdela brings to the Marshach that it's a suffix, it's Dodim Lakan or Lakan. Yeah, but if you say that the Smeh, when the Kumedayik from the Smeh, that Yod Avamachal, that you have to have a Yediyah to make a Mechila, and therefore, obviously every Mechila has to have a Yediyah, but that the actions are not enough, that the action shows on Yediyah. Yeah, but this is something which is discussed in Even Ezer, we discussed it in Hilchas Kedushin. If a lack of Yediyah, I think I remember, if someone remembers, a lack of Yediyah could constitute as an action also or not. Or it's a different sugi, it's not enough time, it's already 2:13. But it's discussed if it'll be Mechila B'Tos or not. But it'll be an interesting shayla if somebody claims he didn't know about it, and that's why he did certain actions, and he waived his rights. Does it work or not? How could you prove it in Amaretz? It's easier to prove it in Amaretz than to prove it to your Talmud Chacham. With that, we'll conclude.